Jerusalem Connection Red Alert Report. I'm your host, Amy Zawi. Today, joining us is longtime friend and returning guest, Barry Shaw. Barry Shaw is with the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. He also has a show called The View from Israel, and he has a Substack, and you can find him on LinkedIn and Facebook. All these links will be available in our show notes, but I want to make sure that you all know where you can find Barry because he is a wealth of wisdom and perspective. Barry, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me back. It's a very sad, tragic occasion, but I'm very happy to share with you and through you, our supporters over there, the Israeli perspective of Charlie's.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, last week, the world, not just the Christian world, but the entire clear thinking, critical thinking world was left shocked with the gruesome murder, the assassination of a man who lived by faith, and he took his faith and built upon it messages of discourse and civil debate in order to share truth and really target young people to be thinking clearly and searching for truth themselves rather than swallowing indoctrination from universities or news sources. And he did so from his position of faith. As such, Barry, the Israelis, and what I noticed right away on my social media feeds and such, was so many Israelis and even my Jewish friends here in America that aren't Christian, aren't even conservative or Republican, so to speak, really offering sympathy and addressing horror about the idea of a voice being silenced for his ideas. So, Barry, as a view from Israel, as your perspective as an Israeli and a scholar on all these kinds of topics, what are you feeling and what have the people of Israel been feeling and responding with since Charlie's demise?
Well, we were absolutely shocked when we heard about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I mean, his killing was absolutely horrific. But in a sense, it didn't come as a surprise because there have been other killings in the past. I remember reporting on a murder of by a Palestinian with a bullhorn, hit him on the head and killed a guy called Paul Kessler. Remember a young couple who were employed by the Israeli embassy who were killed by some assassin as they left, of all places, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And now we have what I call it, the political assassination of Charlie Kirk. And one of the things that surprised us was that our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, disclosed to us in Israel that although he is very busy fighting a war against Hamas and a lot of our other in Yemen, etc., actually had a conversation with Charlie 2 weeks or so before he was murdered. Here we have our Benjamin Netanyahu taking time out to talk privately with Charlie Kirk, and he told us that he had invited Charlie to come back to Israel and to meet with him whenever he wanted. And I can tell you that Charlie had been in Israel 2 or 3 times. He visited even Hebron and visited the tomb of what we call the tomb of the patriarchs. That's the tomb of Abraham from the Bible and his wives Sarah and Rebecca in Hebron. He went to the Western Wall, which is the wall of the Jewish temple, and he prayed there. And he also took his young bride to Jerusalem. You can see the background of Jerusalem from the selfie they took. So he was very enamored with Israel. And I think really the truth of Israel spoke up for the truth of his Christianity and his faith. And we are absolutely joined, just as you and I are, with our joint Judeo-Christian values. I think this makes his death not just all the more poignant, but the fact that he is a symbol for our times, which we're going through a very tragic period where the violence is always initiated on the other side. It is never initiated on our side. However, if you listen to your Western media or people on the left in your political life there in America, you would assume that it's people on Charlie's side that are the radicals, are the fascists, etc. Can be far for it. Just as the same with us. The accusations are made against us. We are the people that instigate all the violence. In fact, we're not. We have always been, but always been, the receiver of all the violence, going back from 1948 and even before.
That's right.
There is a global anti-Semitism which has taken deep roots, particularly in America, and perpetuated by riding political forces in America. And you see this even in the addresses of people like Rashida Tlaib in Detroit, where she not only spoke out against Israel vis-a-vis the Jews, but also against America itself. And this is expressing itself not just in dangerous language, but also by dangerous action. And Charlie Kirk is the latest victim of this.
You know, one thing that came to mind, Barry, maybe you can comment on this. So the night of Wednesday evening, September 10th, I made the mistake of scrolling social media, and I saw doctors, nurses, teachers, students, all kinds of normal looking people posting themselves laughing and celebrating and having glee over the silencing of this young man, this father and this husband. And it just broke my heart. And I thought for just a moment, this is what it must feel like when Jewish people, Israelis or Jewish people, see, after October 7th, the glee that people had, or, after 9/11, we saw celebrations of what happened. And it's one more thread that is connecting us, connecting the Christians and the Jewish people, that we see this evil attack our own, and then we watch the celebrations of it. So what are you hearing from your Israeli friends and neighbors and contacts about the reaction to not just the news of Charlie's death, but the silencing of a voice that was really proclaiming truth about the reality of who the Jewish people are, what the nation of Israel is, their current situation, as well as the biblical roots, the historical roots of their existence? What is the feedback we're getting? As I know the Israeli people have already, you live every day losing your own to the hand of violence.
Let me put this in a couple of terms. First of all, very, very close personal news and information I can give you from where I live. I live in a place in Israel called Netanya. I don't know if you've been to Israel.
I've been, but not to this town.
5 minutes from where I live here, 5-minute walk down to the beach. And so when they talk about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, it's a 5-minute walk to the sea from where I live. But talking personally, I was surprised just a few days ago, and this points again to the deep impact that Charlie Kirk and his horrible murder had even in a tiny place like Netanya. A few days ago, the mayor of Netanya made an announcement. She was going to name a street in Netanya in honor and in memory of Charlie Kirk. Now, it just so happens that last night I was at a charity event for a local cancer hospital where the mayoress was there as well. And I spoke to her about this, and I suggested to her, and maybe by next week we could be acting on it. I said, what we ought to hold in Netanya is something even more significant, and that is actually a one-day conference with Jewish and Christian speakers speaking in honor of Charlie Kirk and having a full one-day conference on this. And I suggested that the guest of honor at this conference should be Mike Huckabee, the US ambassador to Israel, who is a staunch Christian and feels in his biblical bones the identity of the Jews with the Holy Land of Judea and Samaria. And she's taken on this, and I'm hoping perhaps later this week and beginning of next week, we can begin putting this together. So hopefully sometime in the near future, between now and October, November, you will be hearing, I hope, about my involvement and others in having an event here in Netanya, an international event, which would honor Charlie Kirk in a voice of truth, both Jewish and Christian, emanating from Israel.
That would be...
will be recording,
yep.
And I hope to give it to you in order to put out to all your followers as well.
That's what I was going to say. If this is something that we can Zoom live into or catch a recording, we are happy to share that information when it becomes available and give people access to those links, however it may flush out logistically. So that would be a beautiful thing. And on that point, Barry, give us your perspective, give us your train of thought on how this horrible event and,
Yeah.
and all these horrible events that happen to God's people, right? Israel, the Jewish people, and now targeting Christians as well. What does this mean collectively as we continue to deepen our relationship, Christian-Jewish relationships, and the need to battle for truth and battle against terror?
One of the things that troubled me, and I've spoken up about it since the 7th of October, that tragic, horrible day. And the first signs we had from the United States were young people who we'd have thought are educated at some of your finest universities. What were they doing just days after 1,700 of our people had been slaughtered by this death cult, Palestinian death cult, invading us from out of Gaza, where they tortured children, they killed children in front of their parents, they killed parents in front of their children, they took girls, they raped them and butchered them. And what happened when some of the supporters of Israel were putting up posters of, for instance, the Bebas babies on posters around America, and we saw videos of young American people, girls and young men, who were going down, ripping down the posters of the poor Bebas babies who were supposedly at that time were being held hostage by these butchers of Hamas, Palestinian Hamas, in the dungeons of Gaza. These young people wouldn't rip down the poster of some lost dog somewhere, but they ripped down the posters of the Bebas kids and the mother. What sort of warped mind of your young educated Americans would come to this? It points to a poison that has affected these people, that they look at the morality of the champions for the Hamas, not even the poor sympathy for the Palestinians in Gaza or anybody else, but Hamas and the Fatah and the PLO, who are champions. We want a global intifada, a Palestine from the river to the sea. Where is the morality of that? Where is the space even then on the 8th of October for talking about a proper peace between us and the Palestinians? Actually, for them to create their state on the land we surrendered to them in order to make peace with Yasser Arafat and others. And yet they're still chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free in 2025. Which means that your young people over there are coming out of your industry of lies, what you call Ivy League universities of Harvard, Yale and Columbia, with this sort of twisted mindset. There is no place for an Israel, which means there is no place for Jews. And they find morality in that. If you understand this twisted mindset, and they look at it about sympathy for poor Palestinians, it captures all, and that must be the leading thing. I hope you and I will talk about, for instance, the truth about the lies they tell about famine and about ethnic cleansing going on in Gaza. That's subject for another time. Totally deniable with facts and information, and yet they're out on a limb, a dangerous limb, which is devoid of facts, truth, or even any morality. That is your up and coming new generation in America. Beware, because we see Europe in places like France and Britain and even Australia just a few years ahead of you about what is likely to happen in America if you don't find your way back to the magnet of your traditional Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values. If you lose that, you don't even have an anchor or even a life belt to keep you afloat morally.
I mean, Barry, you're 100% right. And one of the reasons why I think Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk's mission that he started when he was only 18 years old was to go to the college campus, because he saw this void of a moral framework that is based on Judeo-Christian values, so you don't have to be Jewish or Christian to exercise those values and relish them and participate in them. So he chose the college campus as his venue because he knew that that's where a beacon of truth had to start, and he did it in a way that was a discussion. I mean, people say he liked to debate. He did, but he was always starting with a discussion. He always asked whoever was questioning him where they were coming from, what they believe, and why, in order to generate a dialogue that would de-escalate that idea of, I don't like what this person is saying, I don't agree with what this person is saying, or I don't want to know the truth that they're saying, and to silence it with, a blowhorn bang over the head or a gunshot or a knife or whatever it may be. And he took that as the forefront of how he was going to take his message. I do not believe people are calling him right wing, they're calling him political commentator. I think that's a mislabel. I think he was a man of deep faith and deep reasoning, and he was taking that message to the students to say, let's employ these factors and sort out what is really going on the planet. Do you have any thoughts about how Israelis have come to understand who Charlie is before his death and after, and how they're remembering him as a staunch advocate for that historical partnership between Jews and Christianity in the West, as well as his rally for truth about what's going on in Israel in their current circumstance?
We identified complete with Charlie Kirk. We saw it because there are many of us here who are prepared to stand up for truth against the lies. This is what Charlie did in his time. He could go, what he says, if people who disagree with me come to the front of the queue when he was speaking on campuses, right? Mm-hmm. It's because he wanted to hear what he had to say, and he answered them with facts and information and truth. Maybe he persuaded some. Maybe he couldn't persuade people because they are so indoctrinated, they refuse to see any morality and truth on the other side. This is something we experience, and I experience all the time. I have been putting since the 7th of October 2023 facts up against the lies I get, not just on campus, but against your media in America and the media in Britain, and against some of the politicians in Britain and France and Australia and Canada, and maybe on the political left in America as well, who talk in all sorts of mantras that are devoid of truth and facts. In another show, I'd like to do that with you. But certainly, one of the things that I'm concerned about, and a lot of people I've spoken to here in Israel, is the big question: who is going to pick up the torch that Charlie Kirk dropped by being shot in the throat? It's it's significant that this deranged character shot him in the throat, because the throat is where Charlie Kirk's truth came out of. The question is, who is going to pick up the mantle and carry Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA forward? I've heard voices like perhaps Ben Shapiro, maybe Dave Rubin, but somebody needs to have the courage in order to pick up that burning torch before it's extinguished forever.
Yes. I think Turning Point has that own concern. I think his wife Erica has publicly stated that they are not folding up shop. Nobody can replace Charlie, but there's a lot of people that share in his vision and his faith and that desire to declare truth to those that are lost and deceived. So we are all praying for that torch to be picked up and carried forward. And I'm appreciative that Israelis feel the same way, because that one voice was silenced. But maybe the result of that will be thousands of voices to take its place, especially on college campuses, in our media outlets, and of course in our halls of Congress and other heads of state and government offices. Barry, what do you see as far as those connections that we can now continue to draw on? I mean, you mentioned the murder in D.C. of the young couple, Yaron and Sarah, back in June. Again, silencing voices that were just trying to share truth. They were actually peace advocates. They were looking for ways to generate peace between the Arabs and the Israelis and what's going on in Gaza. What is your perspective of what Israeli people are feeling that hope is and moving forward? Are there ideas that this will just strengthen our bonds and strengthen our resolve for truth? And again, we will have you on for future episodes so that we can discuss in detail with your facts the libels against Israel, genocide, starvation, those things, as well as the settler colonial myth. Those are going to be two different topics that we cover separately in the coming weeks, because they are important, and it's part of that idea of all of these false narratives coming from professors, coming from our news. What's your perspective moving forward, and what's the mood in Israel?
Well, you have to know that basically Israel is a turning point Israel, because we feel it increasingly isolated since about the 7th of October, and we have been totally shocked where we've seen this rising tide of people, particularly young people, together linked with a lot of Islamists have been immigrated into the different Western countries, but in America, Canada, certainly in Britain, France, certainly in Australia, in numbers way out of proportion of what they were even just a handful of years ago. And we're hearing the voices of denial of truth over there, and in fact the rising voice of lies and everything, in which is leaving Israel isolated. We have been at war now for almost 2 years, and we've been doing it at 2 years. I don't have any sort of details or information for a later show, because we're not committed a genocide in Gaza.
That's right.
If we'd been doing that, the war would have been over in a month. Actually, what we're finding also is the voices, the constant drumbeat coming out of the media in places like America and Britain, where if you switch on, for instance, not just BBC, but Sky News UK, every single program, day after day, is a hit against Israel. And the information that they put out this, and I'll explain this on another show, is total lie, absolute lies. And yet we are still going around the judge because Hamas has to be totally defeated and destroyed. Hamas is a Palestinian version, as Douglas Murray wrote in his best-selling book, a death cult. And this stuff is imposing death not just on us, but also on the people they represent. And it has to be wiped out because it is a genuine evil in the world. There can be no peace without it. Possibly before our next show, you are going to hear in the United Nations a lot of these weak socialist Western leaders gathering in the United Nations to support third world countries and dictatorships and Islamic regimes in declaring a Palestinian state, which will be interpreted by Hamas as a total victory over the Jews. So we're in a situation, virtually like a no-win situation, but we have to do it because they're still holding our hostages. And
Well, that was my next question. Yeah, that was my next question. Barry, we are going to track the UN issues, and then we can definitely talk about that as well. But tell us what is going on as of this week. We're recording this the week of September 15th, 3 weeks before the second anniversary of that horrible day. What is the latest news on the hostages, the efforts regarding them? I know there's just so much heartache in Israel. Give us a quick update on those hostages, what we know.
Well, very, very quickly. We've been saying for almost 2 years, and saying it quietly, diplomatically to the Trump regime in Washington, D.C. Qatar are playing a very dubious double game. They're supposed to be the mediators, but how can you be a mediator when you are hosting the enemy in luxury in Doha, the capital of Qatar? In other words, they've been playing a double game against this, and this is why there's never been any real progress to getting our hostages being released. And quite frankly, fairly recently, the Israeli government took a decision to eradicate the Hamas leadership in Qatar, in other words, to denude Hamas in Gaza of any of their interlocutors who are being hosted by Qatar, who are pretending to be the moderators when they're not moderators at all. Now, this might temporarily have put in a little bit of a dysfunction between us and the Trump administration. As I speak to you right now, Marco Rubio is in Israel with talks with the Prime Minister and everything about this issue. But we need to have a different form of moderation and negotiations, if you like, because Qatar has never been not
An
a
honest broker,
mediator.
right? Yeah.
And therefore, our hostages are in danger. But we are now decided that we are now going in for the final push in order to, we're now putting a siege around Gaza City. We're doing this at a time when the United Nations are going to meet in a week or two to declare a Palestinian state that I mentioned. But this will not detract us from actually defeating our enemy and trying to relieve our hostages. And about the vote in the United Nations, I have to tell you, because this is ahead of time, whatever is decided in the United Nations cannot be legally binding, because it's okay for Britain and France and Australia and maybe Canada to declare together with Iran and all the forces that they declare recognition of a Palestinian state. but in something called the Montevideo Convention, which says no United Nations or any international body can recognize or declare a state until you clearly define its borders. Well, apparently this isn't going to be done in the General Assembly. So how can you decide a state without defining its borders? What, you want a border of Palestine from the river to the sea? Very good. In other words, the United Nations are deciding on a Palestine in which Israel doesn't exist. Yeah. So the whole thing is ridiculous. However, the United Nations will go on and vote for something like this. And the other condition of the Montevideo Convention is that any state that you supposedly tried to create or establish here has to meet with the approval of the neighboring states, which I assume continues to be Israel, perhaps. And the other one is that it has to be actually governed in a rational and normal fashion, and not as a sort of a dictatorship or an Islamic regime, if you want to call it that. So it's all right, fine, having these wonderful people like Starmer, Macron, the leader of Canada, and Albanese in Australia, meeting with Iran and Iraq and Qatar and all the other dubious countries in the United Nations, say we all now recognize the Palestinians. But there are certain conditions, and if those conditions are not fully expressed and itemized, then the whole thing is simply a charade.
Yeah, and that's the thing that most Americans, whether they're college students or more mature adults, they don't understand the nuances of what the history was and that what statehood is legally. And you end up with people just thinking people already think that Palestine was a nation and an ethnicity and a culture, and it wasn't. And then if this resolution comes through, it's just going to reinforce that myth of a Palestine being some sort of Arab state, which it never was. Barry, we're going to pick up on that thought when we talk a little bit more about the myth of settler colonialism that is often labeled that slapped on Israel and is slapped on many of the Jewish people that reside in Israel. Barry, we are so appreciative of your perspective and your time to come on our program. We cannot wait to have you back, and we can drill into more of these topics. It's very important that the Christian community understand the facts, both biblical facts as well as historical and contemporary facts, so that they can better pray for Israel and support Israel in their own networks, whether it's who they vote for, who they write letters to, or who they talk to during the day. So Barry, we appreciate all that you're doing. I encourage everybody to check the show notes to see where you can find Barry's work and his news reports and commentary, because they're very important.
I want to thank you, Amy, what you're doing, and also your friends and followers over there. From here in a lonely Israel, I want to tell you how significantly important this is, particularly with the fall of Charlie Kirk. We need your support even more. If you need any questions for any facts or doubts, you look for me on social media or whatever. I'll be happy to do it. And there's a lot of issues I'd like to discuss with you, Amy, for our joint Christian followers over there as well. A lot of it, I'm sure, will be new information for them, and also very important information for them, and help shed proper light, the light of truth, on the lot of lies that you're being spun right now over there in the States.
Yes, you're right. Barry, you are so right. Thank you again for your time today. Shavua Tov. And we are excited to have you back in the coming weeks.
Lovely to be with you. Thank you, Amy, again for all you do, and thanks for the support for
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you.
O Davidu Chai, O Davidu Chai, O Davidu